Good morning, good afternoon, folks. Thanks for being here. I'm Jamie Proctor-Boyce, and I'm so excited um, to be doing another export funding webinar. We'll just give everyone a second to join and get set up. Um, I will be leading this session solo, though I have some of my fearless colleagues in the background with their cameras off, ready to monitor the chat and post some links. Hi, Dane. We're not going to invite people to come off mic yet, but if you have questions, you can feel free to put them in the chat, or ideally put them in the Q&A function. Sorry, take that back. Don't put them in the chat. Please put them in the Q&A function, and we will be able to monitor them there. So I'll get started. Welcome again to Going Global, the smart way to fund your export journey. I'm Jamie Proctor-Boyce. I've been with Pocketed for just a little over 3 years. And it's my great pleasure to get to work with entrepreneurs every day. And one of the most common questions is, how do I build my audience? How do I extend my reach? How do I get more customers and so that I can grow my business? And market expansion funding is the #1 answer I give. Grants like CanExport SMEs and others, we'll be going through a few today, are great opportunities to connect with more customers in new markets, and thus build your business, right? Drive more revenue, drive more awareness, drive more success. So we are focusing on international market expansion. We'll share more about that along the way, but let's dive in. So again, I'm Jamie, really looking forward to our Q&A at the end. But this session, as I've mentioned, we're going to talk about how to plan for export. What are the key considerations that you need to be thinking about before you're even worrying about which programs? So developing your export plan, and then how to implement funding that can fund some of the activities in that export plan. We're going to talk about specific programs. We're going to share some funder intelligence. And we're also going to give you some grant expert tips. I've been working on grants almost a decade now. And I'm really excited to share some of the things that I've learned along the way that can apply to all programs, but really with a focus on export or market expansion funding. So let's get started. 2025 has been pretty wild so far, right? Particularly when it comes to funding, when it comes to trade and market expansion, it's been a real roller coaster. Thanks to the election results down south, we've had some pretty bold-faced headlines about the looming threat of tariffs. For those of you that also follow other grant news, we've seen the US freeze many grant programs, disassemble certain granting agencies. So it's been a really intense time. And I think it really makes us all understand the role that we play as entrepreneurs, right? We are drivers in our economy, and the economy is a big piece of our political landscape. And so I think that it's a really good time to be thinking about grants, particularly if they're going to help you expand your reach beyond the US. We know that our closest and biggest trading partner is really important to a lot of your businesses, but now might be the time to look at other markets that are relevant to you. So the reason that we don't want you to forget about grants, even as the US is maybe forgetting about grants, is that it's a lot of money out there every year, close to $6 billion. And that number will actually go up in 2025 as some of the marquee programs are even expanding the things that they're funding and offering refunds for. And really, when it comes to market expansion, one of the reasons we love these programs here at Pocketed is because they're industry agnostic. So that's $6 billion goes out to different types of industries, but market expansion in particular is a type of program that doesn't care if you're selling a service, a physical product, an intangible software solution. If you have something that can be exported, then the government is interested in helping you extend your reach and thus bring more GDP back into Canada, right? That's the big goal. We as economic drivers, as entrepreneurs, our role is to drive the activities that the Canadian government cares about, creating jobs, upskilling the workforce, or in this case, creating more customers for Canadian goods and services. So I want to tell you a couple stories about some of my clients that have been really successful. So this first entrepreneur, she was actually a lifelong makeup artist. She had logged a lot of hours putting makeup on actors, models, working on definitely some films that you and I have both seen. But she also, in her 20 plus decades as a hair and makeup artist, had developed an innovative way to organize cosmetics. So she actually developed her own cosmetics case, and by organizing the products in a certain way, she was actually able to get actors and models to set 25% faster. My original career was actually in film production, and I know how important every minute counts when you're renting gear, when you're paying crew, when you're dealing with crazy actor schedules. So 25% faster to set was a big deal. So when I met this entrepreneur, she was a solo entrepreneur. She was already selling in a few markets throughout North America, but she knew she needed to expand. She had about $300,000 in revenue, which meant that she was eligible for the CanExport SMEs program, which I'll share more about in just a minute. And she also knew that she was tired of just working alone. So in our first quarter of working together, we helped her win $56,000. $25,000 was to bring on a new hire, a hiring grant for a new grad. And then the remainder was a CanExport program that helped her expand her reach into 5 new markets. So by the time these grants were done, she was then selling in 8 different markets. She wasn't going at it alone. She had a lot more gas in her tank and a lot more money in her bank to do the projects that she knew she needed to get done. Another company, sorry, let's see. So this one's really exciting. This is actually a recent win, but this is a client here in Nova Scotia, in fact, who makes amazing screen printed clothing. She knew she needed to expand her reach, and we have actually either consulted or offered grant writing for her to help her win over $100,000 from the Creative Industries Fund, from Creative Export Canada, and we're now helping her pursue CanExport SMEs. All of these programs are giving her the funding to create regional specific lookbooks, to attend travel and trade shows, to buy marketing in these new markets where she's trying to sell more of her clothing. And we're really proud of that federal award from the Creative Export Program. We can talk more about that. Sort of like CanExport, but for the creative industries like fashion or interactive media. And so definitely by planning ahead and looking to multiple programs, she was able to win quite a bit of cash. Another company, we actually connected with them when they had just secured their first Costco order domestically for their beverage product that they manufacture in Ontario. And after working with Pocketed for a year, we helped, when we connected, they knew they were going to need more staff to be doing in-store demos, getting the product around to the different Costco stores. So we actually almost immediately upon meeting helped them hire 4 different student interns. We have now helped them secure 12 funding for 12 new hires, 4 of whom have stayed on full time. But we've also helped them win the CanExport Award, what's an award from CanExport. Grants do sort of feel like awards. Sometimes it's like, thank you for choosing me. But their funding award came from CanExport to help them then take that momentum from their domestic expansion and also win money to expand internationally. Another grant is in that total where they also looked to export funding in the agricultural space. So this is a really good learning moment around grants. These people are a consumer packaged goods company, right? They think of themselves as a product company, but because their beverage product had Ontario-based agricultural inputs, they were actually able to get around $42,000 from an Ontario marketing and expansion, marketing and export program. It paid for local and international marketing costs, where the goal of the grant was for the recipients to amplify the impact of Ontario's agricultural sector. But again, this company was able to use that money for their own marketing purposes and again, to expand their reach and acquire new customers. So you might have heard me talk about a couple different fundable activities. there is a really important thing to know about grants. Truth, they're not all industry agnostic, right? Some of them are just for clean tech, some are just for agricultural companies. But really, there's always another layer where grants aren't really funding the company, they're funding their activities. And broadly, grant fundable activities fall into job creation. There's your hiring grants. Always happy to talk about those. R&D and innovation. That's your SHRED tax credit, your IRAP funding. Upskilling the workforce. Those are different training programs that are available in most provinces. Improving sustainability, whether that's, you don't even have to be a clean tech company, but there are grants to implement sustainable initiatives within your business. Capital expenditure. This is a way, generally through tax credits and refunds, that you can recoup costs that you spend on machinery and vehicles. And then the big one that we're here to talk about today, obviously, is export and market expansion. So typically, this does mean international expansion, though for some industries, particularly agriculture, sometimes certain creative industries, interprovincial expansion initiatives can claim funding as well. So it's really important, and we'll come back to this in some of the tips I want to share, that we understand it's not just, every day somebody asks me, okay, I'm this type of business in this province with this headcount, with this revenue. Are there grants for me? The only way to answer that question is to know what types of activities you want to fund in your business. And so if you're ready to fund travel to new markets, you want to attend conferences, you want to go to trade shows, you need to get something translated for a new market. You need help with legal costs because you have to take into consideration the legal implications of selling in a new market. These are all activities, market expansion activities that a grant will fund. So we'll talk more about that in just a second. Just to save us some time later in the Q&A, let's cross off the list what's not typically fundable with grants. There are some bad news stories. Business as usual is not really seen as a growth activity and thus is not grant fundable. So, your monthly internet bill, the office chair that you need to sit at, just, getting incorporated, those types of costs. This is business as usual. The work we all have to do as entrepreneurs, not going to be funded. Another way to think about that is routine operational expenses don't really have that growth story. There isn't an easy way to talk about how that's of benefit to Canada. Creating a new job, that's of benefit to Canada. Creating cutting edge technology, that's of benefit to Canada. Expanding into a new market, that's of benefit to Canada. So domestic marketing and advertising are often thought of as routine operational expenses, but I did put the word domestic on this list because marketing and advertising in international markets is fundable through the CanExport SMEs program, and we'll talk more about that. You always need to be wary of conflicts of interest when you're thinking about grants, so founder salaries or paying the salary of someone related to you is not typically going to be grant fundable, almost never. Business maintenance, you can't usually buy a building or piece of land or another business, with grants, nor can you repay existing debt with grants, and you can't use grants for personal expenses. There's a lot that's not on that list. So let's come back to that in a minute about the things you can pay for with CanExport SMEs. So this is really the marquee program in market expansion funding. It's administered by the Trade Commission. It's got an annual intake, which is right around the corner, which is why we're doing this webinar right now. It essentially funds international business development. It's a 50-50 match. So like most grants, it requires the funded business to contribute half of the overall cost of a project. And to be fair, the grant contribution, the 50% that the funder will give you, is issued as a reimbursement. So really a company needs to have the cash flow to carry costs for their international BD, their business development. And then if they've been awarded the grant, they can recoup those costs and get them reimbursed through the grant. So 50-50 funding, if you buy a $1,000 flight to Paris for a French trade show, $500 of that will come back to you in a reimbursement if you've been awarded the CanExport, and travel was one of the categories that they approved. Minimum request can be $10,000 in funding or a $20,000 project. Maximum per application is a $100,000 project with $50,000 in funding offered. Hot tip, most people do not win the full $50,000. So I want to share this. So if you're planning on applying to CanExport and you're really counting on this money, You've got to understand that it's competitive. It's not a sure deal. And on average, we see companies winning between $25,000 and $35,000 on average. Sometimes less than that. Pretty rarely, pretty rare to go over that most recently, particularly given how competitive grants are. So who's eligible? Oh, sorry, folks. Did you lose my screen share? Does that look okay?
You're good.
I'm going to keep going. Awesome. Thanks, Ryan. My monitor's a little, the connection's not great today, so sorry about that, folks. So you are eligible for CanExport. The main thing is that you have to be a Canadian incorporated business in business for at least a full year. You need to have a full previous tax return that reflects at least $100,000 in revenue. So sales revenue. Now, profit is your business. You did not have to be profitable, but you had to bring in at least $100,000 in sales. And that can't be money that you got from investment or another grant. $100,000 in sales. And unfortunately, we have had clients rejected from this program when they had sales that reflected $99,999. It really does have to be $100,000 or over, and they will check all of this with the CRA. You also need to have between 1 and 499 full-time employees. It's okay if you're the only employee, but they do typically like to see that single founder being paid on payroll. And again, that revenue minimum is $100,000 in sales with a maximum of 100 million. So bigger companies can go after this program. That was Ryan who just chimed in, our brilliant head of marketing, and he ran some really cool analysis on past winners of CanExport. And for our clients who we've done grant writing for, there are hundreds at this point. We see that in general, folks that have actually $1 million or over in revenue are the most successful in this grant. Now, that's not to deter you from applying if you've got less than 100 Gs in sales, but it is to say that the government tends to want to make sure that when they give funding, that the project is de-risked. They want to know that the person who's receiving the money, the company who is the recipient, has the financial viability to sustain the project. And so we do see the most success when companies have around $1 million in revenue. We can talk more about grant writing, but this is something that we offer. Oh, and I do see folks raising their hands. Feel free to put your questions in the Q&A function at the bottom toolbar there, and we'll get to those during the Q&A portion. So CanExport SMEs funds a bunch of activities that I've chatted about already, but I'll run through them quickly. The big one is that it's a travel and trade show grant. This grant really does want Canadian faces in international markets. So some big categories include getting on a plane, your per diem while you're in a foreign country, your lodging costs. It also includes the costs related to attending trade shows or conferences. It can fund marketing and translation, interpretation while you're abroad. It also funds a range of consulting services, business advice, tax advice, legal advice, everything that you need to do to make sure you're set up to sell legally in a de-risked way in your new market. The professional services that you might need to get to that place can be covered in a 50-50 cost share with CanExport. So that's all these consultant and contractual supports. It also can fund IP protection. So we wanting to make sure that your Canadian intellectual property is covered in a new market. CanExport can offset those costs. So now I have to scroll. I've lost my ability to flip between slides here, guys. So this will be fun. Couple quick overviews of what CanExport SMEs does not fund. That includes, so the main people that don't get this grant are distributors. So if you're not the primary seller, if you're a third-party seller or a distributor, great business, nothing negative about that, but unfortunately it's not eligible for CanExport. So if you're a promoter of musical acts, if you're a salon that distributes other people's hair products, you're going to be seen as a distributor or an agent, and you're not going to be eligible for CanExport. It also doesn't cover cannabis or inhalation, recreational substance inhalation companies. It's all about international, so it doesn't cover travel outside of Canada. Again, capital costs, costs around developing your prototype here. As I often say, grants want to see that there's some flicker, that there's some fire already burning, and then the grant is going to pour gasoline on that fire. So if you're still at the MVP stage, you're still building a prototype, you don't have any sales yet, that's great, that's fine. There are totally other programs that might help offset some of those costs, but CanExport isn't one of them. CanExport is going to focus on taking something that's working here in Canada and getting it into new markets, doing the work to get it into new markets, going to meet new buyers, new representatives in new markets, and creating your network abroad. All right, I'm going to move on here because that's just one stream of CanExport's funding. There's actually quite a few, but we're focusing on the two that fund SMEs. CanExport Innovation is great and something you should consider if you are an innovative business developing your own proprietary technology. CanExport's aim, CanExport Innovation's aim is to de-risk international R&D partnerships. So if there is somebody in another market, every application can reflect funding to collaborate with up to 3 different partners, so in up to 3 different countries. The costs of traveling to negotiate the R&D partnership, when you're doing some co-innovation together, if you had a physical good that you were both developing together, you had to ship it back and forth, the legal costs associated with negotiating your contracts together. These are all things that CanExport Innovation can fund. The big difference between this program and the SME stream is that there isn't a revenue requirement. You do need to be, this word should actually be incorporated in Canada. You do need to be an incorporated Canadian business with a CRA number, but there's no minimum years in business, no revenue requirements. Oh, I think maybe people are having a hard time. I'm going to just stop my screen share and come right back in just in case. Hi, folks. And we'll get you over here. So as I'm talking about CanExport Innovation, can you guys see that now? Lynn, I saw you in the chat, so feel free to weigh in and Ryan can ping me if that's no good anymore. Okay, great. Thanks, everybody. So CanExport Innovation, the big difference is that there's not a revenue threshold. You do not have to have made $100,000, but you do have to be developing technology. So TRL 4 or higher, for those of you not in the know, means your technology readiness level. So the Government of Canada has assessed a scale from 1 to 9, with 1 just being an idea, 9 being fully functioning technology that's in market being used by customers. Level 4 or higher means that you have an MVP, you have a working prototype, and you're ready to further develop it outside of a test scenario, get it into the hands of more customers. So this really is a grant for companies that are building technology, who are looking to collaborate with other co-collaborators internationally. All right, let's see. Oh, awesome. So I just wanted to give a quick shout out because people talk about to other programs. People talk about CanExport all the time, very valid. It's a really important program. Literally thousands, if not tens of thousands of people apply to it every year. And we as a firm have supported hundreds and hundreds of winners. But it's not the only one. So there are definitely, the reason that we focus on it obviously is because it's national. And again, it's industry agnostic. It can be, SMEs can de-risk spend on exporting goods or services. But there are totally other programs. You heard me talk about the Creative Export, that second bullet there. That's another federal program that aims to support international expansion activities for the creative industries. So touring, musical shows, curatorial efforts, museum shows, digital media, video games, fashion. These are all things that the Creative Export Program is going to fund, and that is industry specific. There is a program right now in Alberta that's very similar to SME. So if you're an Albertan company and you are doing a trade show, with that program, the Alberta Export Expansion Program, you do have to have earned more than $250,000 in revenue to be eligible. But that program's great. It's only up to 15 grand, but it is great in that you don't have to get approved in advance. With CanExport, we believe that intake will open in the next couple of weeks. Alberta Export is open now, but you can just go to your trade event and then submit receipts within 2 months after traveling outside of Alberta, and claim their reimbursement. So happy to share more about that in the Q&A. I just wanted to share, this is literally just a very small sampling. So here in Nova Scotia, I'm in Halifax. Our Invest Nova Scotia has an export development program. It is open now until the end of the month. Like CanExport, it can help you offset costs of international export activities. In BC for creative industries, there's a fund every year called the Market Expansion Fund. Again, this is focused on interactive media and other cultural exportable products. This should reopen in the summer. Through SCAP, or the Sustainable Canadian Agricultural Partnership, there's lots of different programs. I saw one in Manitoba. I've seen one in Saskatchewan. Most recently, the BC Agricultural and Food Export Program just closed. That was funded by the Sustainable Canadian Agricultural Partnership. That one has opened every year in January, February. So it did just close on the 3rd, but we expect it to reopen in a year. Now, when it comes to export funding, though, you shouldn't just be thinking about grants. There are tons of other supports offered by the different government agencies. So I'll just highlight a few. People ask all the time about EDC Canada, that's Export Development Canada. They're not a granting organization, but they offer some great programs for to help you with international insurance, to help you with your international network. And also they can help you figure out how to get certified appropriately internationally. Export Development Canada does tend to work with more established companies, but all of their programs, even though they're not grants, they are business supports, and those are in your pocketed account. We'll be sharing more about that in a moment. The Trade Commission Service is they're the government agency that supports CanExport SMEs and innovation. They're not just about money. They're also a ton about networks, advice, trade missions. There used to be a great program called Women in Tech California. It was a virtual incubator to help companies who were considering expanding into the US get to know the Canadian market, meet stakeholders there. Pocketed participated in that in 2022. It was a great program. And there's even a list on the Trade Commission's website about upcoming trade missions. Sometimes they're focused on a certain region. Sometimes they're focused on a certain industry. So like there's one coming up soon for oceans-based technologies in Thailand. So you can apply to those trade missions. And then if you're accepted into those trade missions, there's often funding where they'll give you 50% of the cost to participate. So your airfare, your travel costs, your lodging. But it's really great to go on those missions because you're in a group. There's tons of prearranged meetings and get to know yous organized by the Trade Commission. Again, all with the aim of helping Canadian companies cement their business relationships in markets outside Canada. I also wanted to call out the Canada Brand Program. Again, not a grant, but a suite of supports that help agricultural companies develop their Canadian brand. So definitely these programs are in the pocketed database. If you match to them, they'll be reflected on your grant matches. Check them out. Come to our office hours if you have questions about them, or if you're looking for grant writing for any of the programs that are grants, we would love to help. So we'll share more about that too. Oh, I'm back to not being able to flip. Okay. So let's get into some tips. They've sort of been woven throughout. Sorry, my monitor just died again. Okay, so the first one is build your export plan. This is really important. We're going to share, I'll flip now. So when you're building this export plan, some things to consider include, your company overview, your market research, i.e. which markets matter to you and why, how might your product or service need to be adapted for a new export market, what's your marketing strategy? It's going to be different in the US versus Bangladesh. What are the supply chain or logistics considerations when you're entering a new market? What is going to be the impact of these new markets on your financial plan? How does pricing change? Also, what are the revenue metrics that you feel that you can extrapolate based on this plan? What's your risk assessment and what are your mitigations for what might pop up when you're selling in new markets? How long is it going to take? What are the different compliance or legal considerations that you need to make? And what government or industry funding programs or supports might play into the success of this export? So these are all the different types of things that you need to consider when you're building your export plan. And the great news is that grants can fund a lot of them. So really, what you're focusing on with all of these considerations is the why does this matter to Canada? Why is my international growth important for the future economic success of not just my business, but my industry, my province, and my country as a whole? That's what the funders care about in market expansion grant proposals. And there's some of this that ideally you have done before you're working with a grant writer, right? When we're writing a grant, we're not also writing your export plan, though we can do that for a fee. So it is important to work with a grant writer. It's important to understand two things. One is you don't have to have all of this stuff figured out to be pursuing expansion funding. You don't. That you absolutely can work with your grant writer to develop some of the answers to make a competitive grant application. And definitely some of that information is reflected in this bulleted list. Number two, what's good to show up when you're working with a grant writer on CanExport or another expansion application? Where do you want to go, right? Which markets matter to you? What do you need when you're in those markets? So what types of activities do you need funding for? Is it a series of really important trade shows? Is it a ton of marketing? Is it a ton of translation work? Understanding what you need money for is really important. And really, it's not exactly on this slide, but I would say, what are the financial impacts? What can you say, hey, if I get this 25 grand from CanExport, I'm going to be doing X, Y, and Z, and that's going to yield A, B, and C improvements to my revenue, my road, my runway, my staffing plan, which those are all the things that the Canadian government cares about, right? How much money are you making? How many people can you employ? How can you do your part to improve our tax base? So again, you need to build your export plan. There are also many government programs that will help you build your export plan. A big one is called TAP, the Trade Accelerator Program. You can work with government funders or different government orgs to help develop this strategy. Some of this work you're going to need to do, you're going to need to bring the outline of some of this work when you're working with a grant writer on, say, CanExport, but please know you don't have to have all of it figured out. Tip 2, this is a really big one, particularly for CanExport, apply early. So open dates at this point matter more than deadlines, right? In the past, everyone's like, okay, I have until, December 31st. No. When programs open and they are first come, first served programs, we encourage you strongly to apply as early as possible to the program. Again, first come, first served means that they're not waiting for a closing time, a deadline when they're going to review all applications and then make their funding awards. They are assessing applications as they come in. Now, last year, CanExport was tough. People that applied within the first couple of weeks got a quick response from the funder. The service standard that the funder promises is within 60 days. Anybody who applied, I'd say after 4 weeks of the intake, last year they opened on February 29th, and we do expect them to open the last week of February this year as well. Anybody who applied later than basically March to CanExport, some people waited almost 5 months to hear back from the funder. Now, those that were successful in the end were able to claim any expenses that they had incurred on their market expansion project retroactively, but there was a lot of waiting and a lot of hard business decisions that entrepreneurs had to make, trying to figure out whether they would attend a trade show, even though they didn't know if it would be de-risked and funded at 50% through CanExport. So applying early is critical. We do see programs closing early, and we definitely see them staying open. But when you read between the lines of the various declines that people got, they just ran out of money. So how do you stay on top of this? Make sure your pocketed profile is up to date. So You can go into our software. If you don't have an account yet, we'll make sure that you get a code to get a free pocketed basic account. It's going to intelligently match you to all of the grant programs that you match to. So on the regular, our CS, our customer success team, hears that I can't find CanExport in my grant list. Well, that might be because when you created your pocketed profile, you were a pre-revenue company. And now you know that you have achieved that milestone of $100,000 in sales, but you didn't update your pocketed profile. So keep that profile up to date. That's tip one. Tip 2.1. Tip 2.2 is make sure that you then go into your grant matches after your profile's been updated, search for SMEs. There's a little tiny heart in the corner of the software. If you click that heart, it will then enable notifications. You will get alerts in platform and via email when the program is opening, when there's any major change to the program, or when they announce a closing date. So use Pocketed. The software is amazing when it comes to keeping track of opening and closing dates. The notification function, that clicking that little heart, is going to be your friend. Okay, this is another reason that we heard people were declined last year for CanExport. So the tip is update your digital presence to mirror the content in your application. We need to make sure that whatever story you're telling with your grant application, whether that's to Creative Export Canada, whether that's to the BC Food and Agricultural Program or to CanExport SMEs, you need to make sure that there's a cohesive presence both in your application and online. So for the first time last year, we heard from the adjudicators at the Trade Commission, the folks that review the CanExport applications, that they were not only reading the application itself, but then they were also doing digital searches about the company to make sure that there was continuity in the stories that people were sharing, that the information that people were sharing. And we did have a few folks who did not heed their grant writer's advice and did not update their websites before submitting the application, who were declined for the program. There was a mismatch, right? The company, one that I remember, the company had actually developed its own digital product and was exporting it, but their online presence just made them look like an app marketplace for everybody else's apps. So they were seen as a distributor. They weren't seen as somebody having a proprietary good that was ready for export. We would love to help that client again this year, because they did then go and update their website and make sure that what was seen online matched what was in the application. So if you remember one of my slides towards the beginning, we can all agree that it's been pretty chaotic economically and politically. And a lot of that disruption comes from our neighbor to the south. So we are encouraging everyone to look beyond the USA as you're developing your export plan. It's just smart. And better yet, it doesn't mean you have to excise the US. If there are still customers down there for you, if there's still trade show or conference events you'd like to attend, great. The cool thing about every CanExport SMEs application is that you can identify up to 5 target markets, right? The US, but maybe also Australia and New Zealand. So we really do believe, we have not been told this by the Trade Commission, but many of our grant writers have shared that they believe that CanExport SMEs applications that deprioritize the US, who have diversified their potential markets, and include markets beyond the US, will be more competitive in 2025. So tip 5, it's a good tip for export funding, but it's also a tip for all grants. We want you to think about the fundable activities in your project, right? Not just, I'm a software company, but I'm a software company who needs more US clients. I shouldn't have said US. I'm totally not even taking my own advice. I need more European clients. And so the activity there, it's not about who you are, it's the activities that you're conducting. You need to conduct market expansion activities. So really being mindful of those activities. And maybe part of your expansion is that you realize, hey, not only do I need to go to trade shows, but I need more staff. I need a bigger team if I'm going to be able to carry out this export project. Then that's another activity. That's creating a job. You can siphon off that part, since that's, creating a new employee is not something that's funded by CanExport, but that's something that hiring grants love to fund. So understanding that there might be more than one program out there for your project is really critical. Now, this might be programs from different categories, might be a little training, a little hiring, a little expansion, maybe some R&D, but it also could just be all expansion activities. But like my friend who makes the amazing screen printed clothing, she got funding from Creative Industries Nova Scotia. Then she looked to Creative Export Canada, and now she's considering CanExport SMEs. She's diversifying her funders, which also helps de-risk her project, right? If she's declined from one, it still means parts of her project can go forward. So really happy to chat about that if folks have questions. Here's a great way to share how we can help. As I've already mentioned, we have an amazing software product. Pocketed intelligently matches you to the programs that are relevant to your business, the programs that you are eligible for. So again, as long as your Pocketed profile is up to date, you do not need to read about thousands of programs. Instead, using our tool, you can focus on the couple of hundred that likely match to your business. Using our grant writer informed filters in the software product, you can then siphon down that list to focus on maybe the hiring program you need or the market expansion program you want. And then you can apply yourself. You can also always engage a Pocketed grant writer. And then the goal, the big picture, is that you win more money. Your risk is mitigated by investment from the government. You're able to do more quickly, and with less impact on your overall runway when you win grants. Another way to look at how Pocketed can help, because we do have this amazing software product, but we also offer services. So the Pocketed software, the Pocketed basic account that all of you can get for free for attending today's webinar, is really a DIY product. It's completely self-serve. It doesn't come with any human support. You can always attend our free office hours. Those are offered twice a week by our amazing colleague, Monica. She can answer software questions. She can answer high-level grant questions. Once you have realized there's some decent grant money out there for me and I'm willing to make some investments in going after them, you can engage us through our concierge plan, our fractional grant specialist retainer. You can get a consultant in the mix. So instead of using software to winnow down your applications, you can get a human to be doing research sprints on your behalf, and making recommendations and offering strategic advice about which of the, say, 5 to 10 programs we believe you should pursue in a year. So that's typically for companies that are in certain priority industries who have a decent amount of revenue traction, a couple of years in business. Now, you do not have to be our consulting client, though, to access grant writing. You do need to be our consulting client if you want us to tell you which grants to pursue. But if you know that you would like CanExport SMEs, please, we're available for grant writing. You can just send us an email to hello@hellopocketed.io, or there's a handy little button in our tool. Whenever you're looking at a specific grant match, it has a button that says hire a grant writer. You can express your interest in support for that specific program. We'll ask you a few questions if we have any, and we'll also quote you pricing. So as I mentioned, if you don't already have a Pocketed account, you should get one. And the way to do that is to use the referral code EXPORTUNITY, export and opportunity. There's a lot going on there, folks. EXPORTUNITY25 for this I was going to say beautiful year, 2025 that we're in, this unexpected year, this dynamic year that we're in. So EXPORTUNITY25 will get you a free Pocketed basic account. You can start checking out your matches, start checking out our functionality, and hopefully identify more programs that can help your business do more sooner. Okay, I'm going to stop my screen share and pass it over to Ryan to direct me a bit in the Q&A. I'm going to look at it myself. Anywhere you think I should start, Ryan? All right. Great. So the first question that I'm seeing, and I'm just looking in the Q&A function, folks. So if you haven't put your question there, we'll try to do as many as we can. We do have quite a few questions and about 15 minutes left. So the first question is from Colin. Hi, Colin. Nice to see you. Who's looking to collaborate with a partner on a conference in Australia. You are looking to attend their Melbourne conference in October. That's great. If it's a pre-existing event, that should be part of your CanExport application. And you're looking for funding to cover the expenses to build that relationship with them. Absolutely. You can plan a trip, and then while you're there, you can take different business meetings. They don't just have to happen like at the, lunch table at the conference. So trade shows and business development events or meetings. The costs that are actually covered are your travel to get there, your lodging, your per diem while you're there. But absolutely, that would be a CanExport SMEs right fit program. Colin asked, would that be the Trade Commission? So that's CanExport SMEs funder. Absolutely. EDC does not offer funding. They have a couple of different programs, but definitely Trade Commission is going to be more of a fit for you. Jeff mentioned in my slide, founder salaries are not fundable, but they are if you use Shred. Thank you, Jeff. You're totally right. And I love a shout out to Shred because it's such an important piece of people's business. For folks that don't know about Shred, it's called the Scientific Research & Experimental Development Tax Credit. Send us an email. We've got a couple of webinar recordings that we can send about Shred. But essentially, if you Shred is a tax credit, but you get a cash refund that gives you back 35% of your spend, different levels and different categories on innovation, R&D. So if you are advancing scientific research or overcoming a technical hurdle, you can get money back on that spend, not market expansion. And Jeff makes a good point with Shred, and Shred almost exclusively, founder salaries, you can recoup money if you're paying yourself on payroll. Irina asks, recent tax return have to be the recent fiscal year, or can it be the fiscal year before? I think it has to be, the words they use in the application guide, Irina, are the most recent complete tax filing. So what that means, if you read between the line, is they want the most recent year. But if your 2024 taxes are not yet due, right? You don't have to file them till June. In that case, they would likely look at your 2023 taxes. But if your current tax year filing is due, then they're going to want to see that. I'm going to go over here to Peter. Peter shares that he's a nonprofit social enterprise in Ontario. So for the most part, market expansion funding is focused on the for-profit user. CanExport is not open to nonprofits. And he further says, so that's probably the first place to start, Peter, is that market expansion is not really going to be the best funding category for your business to look at. He's looking for funding for home-based contract people. So I'm not totally sure what that means, but typically hiring grants fund employees, so they don't fund contractors. You need to hire someone on payroll. But there's so many more categories of funding for nonprofits. Lots of nonprofits work with Pocketed on a retainer model because there's so many funding sources. We're happy to do that research for you for a fee. Okay. Someone asked, when is this expected to go live? I think that we're asking about CanExport SMEs. That's a great question, and I'm not sure I've totally underscored that. So the most important program of all of the opportunities we've shared is CanExport SMEs. It's that industry agnostic 50-50 funding that will offset up to $50,000, though realistically, you're probably not going to get an award over $35,000. So for CanExport, that program opens every year. The last couple of years, it's open in February. Our CEO was on a panel last week in Toronto and was told by the Trade Commission that they do anticipate CanExport SMEs opening their intake in late February. So we think it could open any day. And if you're working with a grant writer, it usually takes between 1 to 2 weeks to prepare the application. So that's why we'd love to be writing the application now so that we can submit it at the front of the queue. I hope that answered your question. Colin asks again, sorry, not again, but Colin asks, is the CRA number as a sole prop, it will not qualify you for CanExport. It's also a bigger question. The majority of grants are supporting incorporated businesses. It's seen as a level of traction, a mark that you are viable as a business. So we do see folks when they incorporate their businesses, their matches and pocketed, their grant matches go up about 80%. Emily asks, can you use export funding, CanExport funding, for multiple trade shows within the same country? Yes, 100%. You can even take multiple trips. So a CanExport application, again, outlines the countries that you want to visit, and it outlines the activities you want to undertake. You will mention the specific trade shows that you want to attend. If those change, that's okay, as long as the trade shows you actually attend are still in your target market or help you access consumers from your target market. That's a really important point. We know that, say, for example, you're trying to access the US market, but there's a trade show in the UK where a bunch of US buyers are going to be. You can make the case in your CanExport application that you need to go to the UK event to access the US buyers. But absolutely, CanExport projects, you can put forward activities for up to 2 years. So this year's intake will focus on activities starting April 1st, 2025, to either March 2026, or you can even ask for funding through March 2027. It's more rare to ask for a 2-year project, but it is allowed. And so absolutely, Emily, if you're looking to go to the US in June, and again in August, and then again in February, and while you're there, you want to go to multiple events, great bang for your buck. The CanExport team is going to love that. They only have to pay for 1 plane ticket, but you're going to 3 events. That's a good news story for them. It makes you look like an efficient, well-intentioned, well-researched entrepreneur. So that's great. The other thing I should mention, as folks are looking at the US, I know I've been trying to tell you don't focus just on the US, but it is important to note that the US actually represents 4 markets. It's divided in quadrants. So just know that it still could be considered a new market for you, even if you are already selling heavily in one area of the US, if then you want to focus on another area of the US. Great. So folks, let me just give a quick read. I think we have time for about 2 more questions. I think I just answered your question, Arena, about using CanExport within the current government fiscal. So applications now are to request money for the upcoming government fiscal or up to 2 government fiscals. Johan asks, does Pocketed help with market research to identify the most promising markets beyond the US and provide services to get into those markets? Yeah, I mean, our services are largely limited to grant writing, but we also do a ton of research and consulting. So yes, if you're interested in us helping research and or write your export plan, we write business plans all the time for a fee. So absolutely, that's something that we can help with. You get a little bit of that support when you work with the grant writer, right? You do not need to show up with a fully formed market export plan. Again, you need to know, where you want to go, what your budget is. You need to be able to provide and work with the grant writer to share some metrics with the funder about what the impact of their funding could be. But some of that work can definitely be done with the grant writer in the context of a specific funding application. So yeah, somebody asked, we got approved for CanExport 2 years ago, but we're denied last year. Join the club. Many people were denied last year. It became very, very competitive, which is why we cannot encourage folks enough to apply early. And if you don't think you have the expertise or the time, hire a grant writer. That would be ideally pocketed. Anonymous asks, last year we launched our own in-house product and want to apply for that. Any suggestions of how we should proceed or what we should focus on? Absolutely. I mean, I think being denied in a past year doesn't mean you can't apply in the future, particularly if your products have changed. Listen, with all grants, whether it's with SHRED, whether it's with hiring grants, market expansion grants, funders want to see a growth story. So sometimes getting denied is fine. They're like, you don't meet our mandate this year, but then you come back strong in another year with a new product, a new market focus, new revenue numbers, new years in business numbers. I do believe that Canadian funders understand that there's some unevenness to Canadian businesses, right? We've got hot years, we've got cold years. So it never hurts to throw your hat in the ring another time, particularly if you were funded once before. All right, so there are lots of other questions. I'm going to try to get to one here. Are they specific about what makes up the 100K sales minimum? Someone asks. Yes, it's a specific number on a specific line of your tax return. I don't have that dug up, but if you send us an email, I'd be happy to share that with you. So literally how they qualify that you have met the $100,000 sales revenue from CanExport is based on a single number that you put in your tax return. I want to say it's line 151, but I'm totally just making that up. So if you folks want to send us an email, that is a great segue into how I'd like to wrap this session up, which is to say you can reach out to us at hello@hellopocketed.io. That's our customer success inbox. We're happy to answer any questions that we quickly can offer, or to suggest the best product if it feels like you actually need grant writing or grant consulting. You also are welcome to come to our office hours. I don't know if you have that link on hand, Ryan, for the chat, but we can send it to you by email if you flip us an email, again, at hello@hellopocketed.io. Office hours is our free way to access a grant specialist in a group setting. We hold those at least twice every week. You can come and bring any question that we didn't get to, or you can send that question by email. We'll do our best. The third place you can look is your pocketed account. We have tons of insights about popular programs like CanExport SMEs in the tool. So set up your pocketed account. Exportunity 2025 is the code to get a free basic account if you don't already have one. And then we can, you can see all of the insights about this program in the tool. So with that, I will thank you for your attention. It's always a marathon to do one of these on your own. So I'm going to go drink a bunch of water and hope that I didn't talk too fast. I hope that all of you got some value out of this session. Making sure that we're selling more Canadian goods and services in other markets benefits all of us. So thank you for exploring export funding. Thank you for doing your part to be an important economic driver as an entrepreneur and founder. It's tough, and it's particularly feeling tough this winter. But Pocketed is here to answer any questions and offer any support that we can. And truly, we thank you for the work you're doing, doing cool things with your businesses, creating more jobs, and getting more Canadian goods and services into the wider world beyond the United States. So I hope you all have a great Tuesday. And I look forward to seeing you in the inbox or at our office hours session. Take care, folks.